Hi there. Thank you so much again for joining me on this channel. As always, I'm very grateful for all your previous views, likes, subscriptions and shares. And what a moment to celebrate as we have 350 subscribers. Thank you so much for your support on this channel. It energizes and enthuses me. I'm absolutely blown away by the support. And we've even had some requests for merch. I'm not sure if I'm at the stage yet to start mass producing keyrings and pens. And the idea of a Farney Fun squishy, quite frankly, is terrifying, but you never know what the future will bring. So let's see how it goes. I'm also aware too that I haven't done anything on philosophy at all. It's been implied in some of the movie stuff that we've looked at, but I thought I would put that right and would have a look at something called utilitarianism. But before we dive into utilitarianism, I went to Google, typed in define and used that little trick where you can look up words. And philosophy simply means a lover of wisdom. And philosophy encompasses all sorts of different ideas. And I'm particularly interested in moral philosophy. That is right and wrong. And how do we get to making decisions about right and wrong? And what mechanisms, what can we use to help make informed decisions? Well, that's why I want to look at something called utilitarianism. And the word comes from the word utility, which basically is something that is useful. Now consider Monopoly, that board game often played at big family occasions, and maybe you've had rows over it and the Monopoly board has been thrown across the living room and a small little metal dog has been wedged in someone's ear as a result. But it has options of buying property plus utility companies, gas, water and so forth. They are useful. It's very nice to have electricity in your home. It's very useful to have water. It's very useful to have gas. Things that are useful are utility, something that can be used. And the theory of utilitarianism is a method, a way of thinking of trying to come to actually making good moral decisions. But we need to understand the context of utilitarianism. So we need to go back to the 1800s in the United Kingdom. And it was a time of massive change. The Industrial Revolution. People were moving from the countryside to urban areas. There was also a lot as a result of inner city squalor. Now, this is a very famous image by Hogarth of Gin Lane. Now, this is from the 1700s, so it's just before. But don't think for our international viewers that British people were sitting around nicely drinking tea in the streets. No, we drank an awful lot of gin. And of course, all the problems associated with excessive alcohol. Also happening at the same time was the abolition of slavery in 1807 through William Wilberforce. And also the Victorian internet, the postal system. You could send a letter for nothing more than a penny. And of course, transportation. Your letter could be carried on a train, and various parts of the country started to become connected. And that improved, of course, people's communication and trade. And this gentleman, Jeremy Bentham, was born at a time where he straddled those two worlds of the late 1700s and early 1800s. He was a precocious young man. At the age of 3, he was learning Latin, and at the age of 12, he went to university. And at Oxford, he would actually argue with his lecturers. But he was also way ahead of his time in terms of thinking about social justice. He wanted, for example, animals to have rights, and he felt very strongly that homosexuality should be decriminalised. So he was way ahead of the curve at the time. And you can actually go and see him at University College London. He requested that his body be embalmed, and you can go and view it in this case. It's not his real head, by the way. It's just a wax one. His real head was the subject of some pranks over the years from other students. And at one time, my understanding is that it ended up at Aberdeen railway station in a locker. So there he is. If you want to go and visit Bentham, you can go and do that. So he came up with this phrase. He was an atheist. He didn't believe that your morality had to come from a religion or a god or some sort of holy book. And he proposed this statement: the greatest happiness for the greatest number. The greatest happiness for the greatest number. But what does that actually mean in real life? Well, let's use the chocolate example. Let's say you're in a class and there's 30 of you in this class. It might be at university, it might be at school, maybe it's some kind of meeting at work. And whoever's running it goes, I tell you what, I've got some chocolate. Hooray, you think, fantastic. And there's all sorts of chocolate available. Okay, there's white chocolate, there's dark chocolate. Okay, there's low sugar chocolate. And there's enough for everybody apart from one person. So 29 people in that room get chocolate and one person doesn't. You might think that's unfair. But Jeremy Bentham said, actually, that's fine because it's the greatest happiness for the greatest number, the greatest good to the greatest number, if you will. And 29 people are happy and one person is unhappy. That's fine. It's a numbers game. And actually, governments work a bit like that, don't they? They have a certain amount of money for taxes and they have to spend those taxes in a certain way to try and bring about as much happiness as possible. So there we are with the chocolate example. And it seems like a silly example, but you can actually see how it operates in real life. So hospitals have a certain amount of money, have to spend it in the right way, charities, schools, so forth and so on. But there's a couple of issues with this. There was more than a few issues, but we'll come to that a bit later on. But Bentham also suggested that what we need to do when we're making a decision, okay, he came up with what's called the hedonic calculus. Now, calculus in terms of calculating and adding up the numbers, hedonic as in coming from the word hedonism, meaning pleasure or happiness. And he said, well, if we're going to make these decisions on the greatest good to the greatest number, we need to actually perhaps think a little bit more deeply. So he came up with these 7 rules. And first of all, we talked about the intensity of the happiness. In other words, how deep, how superficial the happiness is. How much can you quantify that happiness? That's quite a tricky thing to do, isn't it? So let's say, is the chocolate really, really cheap chocolate from a budget supermarket, or is it luxury chocolate? You know, very high quality cocoa. Okay, that's something you might want to take into account. And also there's the duration. How long or short does this happiness last? If it's only a brief moment, okay, or is it going to last for a long, long time? Think about an injection. Okay, so you might get a vaccination against a disease. It's a very, very short amount of pain, brief amount of pain, but goodness me, that's going to protect you from a disease for the rest of your life. What about the certainty? And Bentham said here, how sure can we be that this happiness will occur? So there's no point, for example, in whoever's dishing out the chocolate doing that and realizing that actually, let's say everyone in the class has bad teeth. Okay, giving them chocolate isn't going to help their dental work, is it? Silly example, I know, but how sure can we be? In other words, we're trying to predict the future, and that can be an issue as well, can't it? We've also got this lovely old-fashioned word, propinquity, how near or remote the happiness is. And that can have a big effect, can't it? So how close you are to that person who's being affected by your decision. Okay, literally, are they right next to you, or are they on the other side of the world? Sometimes making decisions when you're not seeing those people can be easier, or sometimes it can be harder. The 5th thing he argued was fecundity, wonderful word, which is how likely is the decision to lead to further happiness? I'm not sure if they had emojis back then, there's a little smiley face. So is giving out that chocolate going to lead to further happiness, or is it going to cause other problems? So that's something as well to be considered. Finally, the purity, how free from pain the happiness is. There's no point, for example, it says like a silly example, but giving someone a brand new toy for Christmas, a small child, hey, get really excited. But there's no batteries for the toy. You forgot to get them and all the shops are shut. And there you have a small child sitting in front of you in tears. So maybe it would have been better to give them the present the day after when the shops were open and you could actually get some batteries. So how pure is that happiness? And also the extent, will that happiness spread? Okay, so will other people start giving out chocolate in those meetings or classrooms? Now, it's not a perfect list, but the point is that Bentham realised that actually you needed some sort of checklist. You needed some sort of way of considering how effective your actions were and the long-term consequences. And actually, that's very, very important with utilitarianism. This is all about consequences, not your motivation, but the outcome. But that's not the end of the story. There was a gentleman called John Stuart Mill who decided to take this idea of utilitarianism and to tweak it and to study it and adapt it. He was a smart kid too. At the age of 3, he was learning Greek, and by his early teens, he was a very competent, I can't even say the word, economist. And what he decided to do was he came up with this very famous quote. This is our third thing. He said this: "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." He's basically arguing this, that actually Bentham's idea of the greatest happiness to the greatest number, yeah, there's merit in this, but it needs to be fine-tuned. It needs to be tweaked. In other words, there are different types of happiness. And he went on to talk about higher and lower pleasures. So, for example, would you rather go and watch, say, the latest Christopher Nolan movie, which is a higher pleasure, or would you rather sit through some of Jason Statham's back catalogue? Would you rather go out and have a fine meal with the most beautiful steak and the greatest dessert ever at Heston Blumenthal's restaurant? Or would you rather get a budget sandwich from a petrol station? The point is that it's all very well saying that you're hungry or you want to watch a film, but there are different qualities of happiness. There are different qualities of pleasure. And that was the point that Bentham and Mill clashed over, because Mill argued that it is simply not enough to say that there is happiness. There are different qualities of happiness. So that's something you may want to think about. And when you're playing around with utilitarianism and doing your own research and ideas, have a think about, first of all, that example of, the greatest good to the greatest number, and think about how it is a numbers game. Secondly, think about that hedonic calculus, and is Bentham right? Can you take those 7 ideas and come up with a good way of making sure we're making the right decisions? And thirdly, think about John Stuart Mill, and was he right to challenge in terms about the quality of the happiness experience? As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm very grateful for all your shares, likes, subscriptions and likes. And as always, enjoy your learning.